Las Vegas made a desperate $1.4 billion gamble, and if it fails, the city dies. Right now, over 2 million people live in the middle of one of the driest deserts on Earth. They drink, shower, and survive on a single source of water. One lake, and that lake has been draining for 20 years. By 2022, Lake Mead had dropped so low that Las Vegas was months away from losing access to its own water supply. Not a shortage, not restrictions. Gone. Completely gone. So the city did something no one had ever attempted before. They drilled a tunnel 3 miles through solid rock, deep beneath the floor of Lake Mead itself, to reach water that no drought could ever touch. They called it the third straw. It cost $1.4 billion, and it took 7 years to build. It should have solved everything. But here's what they didn't tell you. The lake is still draining. The tunnel only reaches so deep, and 40 million people across 7 states are all fighting over the same disappearing river. So the real question is, did Las Vegas just save itself? Or did they just drill the world's most expensive hole into a problem that has no solution? Las Vegas was never supposed to exist. The city sits in the Mojave Desert, one of the most unforgiving stretches of land in North America. Annual rainfall averages just 4 inches. Summer temperatures regularly crack 115 degrees Fahrenheit. The ground is dry, cracked, and ancient. There are no rivers running through it, no natural lakes within reach, no underground aquifers large enough to sustain a city of any real size. By every measurement nature has ever offered, this was a place where a major city simply could not survive. And yet, more than 2 million people call it home. In 1940, Las Vegas was a railroad town of roughly 8,000 residents. Modest, dusty, forgettable. Then came the casinos, the highways, the air conditioning, and the American appetite for reinvention. The population exploded in ways that urban planners had never modeled and water managers had never prepared for. By the 1970s, the city was growing faster than nearly anywhere else in the country. By the 1990s, it was one of the fastest expanding metro areas in American history. Today, the Las Vegas Valley houses over 2.3 million people, welcomes 40 million tourists every single year, and shows no signs of slowing down. All of them need water. The city consumes approximately 300,000 acre-feet of water per year. That is nearly 98 billion gallons. To put that in terms that means something, it is enough water to submerge the entire island of Manhattan under 3 feet of liquid. Every year. And nearly 90% of every drop comes from one place, Lake Mead, fed by the Colorado River. The Southern Nevada Water Authority, the agency responsible for keeping Las Vegas alive, manages this impossible equation every single day. Their entire operation depends on a reservoir that stretches across the Nevada-Arizona border and was built during an era when the Colorado River seemed limitless. It was not limitless. It never was. The Colorado River Compact, signed in 1922, divided the river's water among 7 states based on flow measurements taken during some of the wettest decades in the region's recorded history. Scientists now know those measurements were dangerously optimistic. The agreement allocated more water than the river actually produces in most years. That miscalculation has been quietly accumulating for a century. Las Vegas inherited a water future built on a flawed foundation. A booming city, a shrinking river, a single lake standing between 2.3 million people and catastrophe. And the lake was already starting to disappear. Las Vegas has always known it was living on borrowed time, so it built its survival in stages. The first intake pipe, what water engineers call intake number 1, was constructed in 1971. It was a straightforward piece of infrastructure for its era. A pipe positioned at an elevation of 1,050 feet above sea level, pulling water directly from Lake Mead and pumping it toward a thirsty and rapidly growing city. At the time, it seemed like more than enough. Lake Mead was full, the Colorado River was flowing, and the idea that the lake could ever drop low enough to threaten the intake seemed almost theoretical. Water managers planned for growth. They did not plan for disappearance. By 1993, the population had doubled and then doubled again. Intake number 1 alone could no longer guarantee supply security. So the Southern Nevada Water Authority built a second pipe. Intake number 2, positioned slightly lower at an elevation of 1,000 feet, was designed as a backup, an insurance policy against the possibility that lake levels might one day fall far enough to compromise the first. It was a cautious, forward-thinking decision, and it still was not enough. Both intakes were engineered for a world where Lake Mead stayed reasonably full, a world where the Colorado River delivered what the 1922 Compact promised, a world that, by the early 2000s, was already vanishing. The critical number that keeps water engineers awake at night is 895 feet. That is the elevation at which Lake Mead reaches what is known as dead pool, the point at which water can no longer flow past Hoover Dam under any circumstances. At that level, both existing intakes become useless. The pipes are still there, the pumps still work, but the water they were built to reach is simply gone, sitting below their openings, inaccessible and irretrievable. By July 2022, Lake Mead had dropped to just over 1,040 feet in elevation. Intake number 1 was operating dangerously close to its functional limit. The Bureau of Reclamation's own projections warned that continued decline was not just possible, it was probable. At the rate the lake was falling, water managers calculated they had years, not decades, before intake number 1 went dry entirely. Inside the Southern Nevada Water Authority, the internal alarm was no longer quiet. The city that should never have existed was now staring at a future that the original engineers had never imagined, and the original intake pipes were never built to handle. Something had to be drilled. Something had to go deeper. The question was whether it was even possible. The plan was audacious. The execution was nearly impossible. Engineers at the Southern Nevada Water Authority had a single objective: build a third intake pipe positioned so deep beneath Lake Mead's surface that no drought in recorded history could ever reach it. Not close to the bottom, below it, through the bedrock underneath the lake bed itself, reaching water at an elevation of 860 feet, lower than dead pool, lower than anything either existing intake could touch, lower than any municipal water intake ever constructed in the United States. To get there, they would need to drill a tunnel 3 miles long through solid volcanic basalt, some of the hardiest rock on the continent, while working hundreds of feet below an active reservoir holding trillions of gallons of water directly overhead. Construction began in 2008. From the start, nothing was easy. A massive tunnel boring machine, nicknamed Sandy by the crews who operated her, was assembled underground and set to work grinding through the basalt layer by layer. Sandy measured 23 feet in diameter, wide enough to drive 2 vehicles side by side through the finished tunnel. She was precise, powerful, and still completely unprepared for what the geology had waiting. Unexpected rock formations forced crews to stop and recalculate. Equipment broke down under pressures that the engineering models had underestimated. Water seeped through fissures in the rock, threatening to flood active sections of the tunnel before sealing work could catch up. The heat underground was relentless. Workers operated in confined spaces, deafened by the grinding of steel against ancient volcanic stone, acutely aware that an active lake sat directly above their heads. Project engineers described the operation as threading a needle through a mountain, blindfolded, underwater, with no margin for error. Maintaining tunnel alignment over 3 full miles of drilling through shifting volcanic formations required constant measurement corrections. A deviation of even a few degrees, compounded across that distance, could mean missing the target shaft entirely. Every calculation carried consequences that could not be undone. At the end of the tunnel, crews drilled a vertical shaft 300 feet straight down into the lake bed to reach the intake point at 860 feet elevation. It is the deepest water intake ever built in the United States. A structure that exists in complete darkness, under crushing pressure, beneath the floor of a lake that millions of people depend on to survive. Sandy completed her run in 2014. The tunnel was sealed, tested, and declared operational in 2015. The engineering had worked. The impossible had been built. But 7 years of drilling, problem solving, and near disasters had also produced something else entirely. A bill that made even the most hardened infrastructure veterans go quiet. $1.4 billion. That is what it costs to guarantee a city's survival when nature stops cooperating. The Third Straw project became the most expensive municipal water infrastructure investment in American history. Every dollar came from a single source, the residents and businesses of Southern Nevada, through steadily increasing water rates that climbed year after year as construction dragged on and costs mounted. Las Vegas households watched their water bills rise, not because they were using more water, but because they were paying for the tunnel being drilled beneath the lake that kept them alive. It was a tax on survival, and most people had no choice but to pay it. The political friction was immediate and loud. Critics argued that $1.4 billion was an obscene amount of money to spend chasing a retreating lake deeper underground, when the same investment could have funded desalination plants, advanced water recycling systems, or aggressive demand reduction programs that addressed the root of the problem instead of its symptoms. Environmental groups were sharper in their criticism. Building the Third Straw, they argued, sent exactly the wrong message, that Las Vegas could keep growing, keep expanding, keep welcoming millions of new residents and tourists, because the engineering would always find a way to keep up. It rewarded overdevelopment with infrastructure instead of demanding restraint. John Ensminger, general manager of the Southern Nevada Water Authority, pushed back directly. The Third Straw was not a growth strategy. It was a survival strategy. Water managers do not have the luxury of planning for optimistic scenarios. They plan for the worst case, because in the desert, the worst case has a way of arriving ahead of schedule. The numbers proved him right almost immediately. By 2022, Lake Mead had dropped to levels that put intake number 1 under genuine operational stress. Without the Third Straw already in place and fully functional, water managers estimate Southern Nevada would have faced emergency restrictions severe enough to threaten the economic stability of the entire region. The $1.4 billion project, completed 7 years before the crisis peaked, had effectively served its purpose before most residents even understood what it was built for. To put the cost in perspective, $1.4 billion exceeds the total annual water infrastructure budget of most American states. For a single pipe, a single tunnel, a single intake structure sitting in permanent darkness beneath a lake that may still not hold enough water to matter. The uncomfortable question that the price tag forces into the open is the same one the engineers quietly debated during every delay, every equipment failure, every cost overrun. Was the city buying survival or just buying time? The Third Straw was built for a crisis. The crisis arrived exactly on schedule. Through the early 2000s, Lake Mead had been draining in a slow, steady, almost imperceptible decline. Then the decline accelerated. By 2021, federal water managers declared the first ever water shortage on the Colorado River, a designation that triggered mandatory cuts to water allocations across multiple states. By mid-2022, Lake Mead had dropped to just over 26% of its total capacity. The lowest level ever recorded since the reservoir was filled for the first time in the 1930s. A lake that once stretched 247 square miles and plunged 532 feet at its deepest point was hollowing out from the inside. The retreating shoreline told the story that the numbers could not fully capture. Boat docks sat stranded hundreds of feet from the water's edge, their ramps descending into cracked, bleached lakebed. A bathtub ring of white mineral deposits climbed the canyon walls like a geological scar, marking every foot the lake had lost. Ghost structures reappeared from the exposed lakebed: old foundations, submerged roads, the ruins of a resort town called St. Thomas that had sat underwater since 1938. Lake Mead was not just shrinking, it was revealing its own historic history as it disappeared. Water managers at the Bureau of Reclamation had forecast further drops heading into 2023. Their models, built on 2 decades of declining inflows and increasing demand, pointed consistently downward. Then something unexpected happened. The winter of 2022 to 2023 delivered record-breaking snowpack across the Rocky Mountains. Snow levels in the upper Colorado River Basin exceeded seasonal averages by extraordinary margins. As temperatures warmed in the spring, that snowpack released slowly, feeding rivers and streams that eventually drained toward Lake Mead. The reservoir rose by more than 20 feet in a single year, a reversal so dramatic that the Bureau of Reclamation scrapped its decline projections entirely and rewrote its 24-month outlook from the ground up. Lake Powell, sitting upstream, rose by more than 50 feet in the same period. Scientists urged immediate caution. One exceptional snow year, they warned, does not rewrite 20 years of overuse. The Colorado River Basin had just endured one of the driest 2-decade stretches in recorded history. The lake remained more than 160 feet below full capacity. The recovery was real. It was also fragile, weather-dependent, and built on conditions that climate models suggested would become increasingly rare. The third straw had been designed for exactly this moment of uncertainty, for the years when the lake might not recover, when the snow might not fall, when the models pointing downward turned out to be right. It was built for the next time, and there will be a next time. Drilling deeper was only half the strategy. The other half was using less. Las Vegas understood early that engineering alone could not solve a math problem this severe. A city consuming 98 billion gallons of water per year, drawing from a shrinking lake, in a desert getting hotter every decade, no tunnel, no matter how deep, could outrun those numbers forever. So alongside the third straw, the Southern Nevada Water Authority built something equally ambitious. Not a pipe, a culture. The results are genuinely remarkable. Since 2002, Las Vegas has cut its per capita water consumption by more than 40%, not despite population growth. During it, the metro area added hundreds of thousands of residents over that same period and still managed to use less total water than it did 2 decades ago. By any measurement, it is one of the most dramatic urban conservation turnarounds in American history. The mechanics behind that number are deliberate and far-reaching. Las Vegas recycles approximately 99% of its indoor water. Treated wastewater discharged back into Lake Mead earns the city return flow credits, which count against its annual Colorado River allocation. Every gallon used indoors and returned to the system is effectively used twice. It is an elegant solution to an impossible equation, and no other major American city does it at the same scale. Outdoor water is where the real battle was fought. Nevada passed legislation banning ornamental grass, the decorative turf that lines medians, surrounds office parks, and covers suburban front yards without serving any functional purpose. The removal program is estimated to save approximately 6 billion gallons of water annually. 6 billion gallons that used to evaporate under a desert sun, serving no purpose except appearance. Residential water use became the next frontier. Nevada proposed legislation giving water authorities the power to cap household consumption at roughly 163,000 gallons per year. the first regulation of its kind anywhere in the United States. The proposal generated friction. Residents pushed back. But the underlying logic was undeniable. When a resource is genuinely finite, unlimited individual consumption is not a right the system can continue to afford. Regional cooperation added another layer. Tucson, Arizona, voluntarily reduced its Lake Mead allocations, foregoing water it was legally entitled to take. Federal compensation programs incentivized other cities across the basin to follow. The renegotiation of the Colorado River Compact, the 1922 agreement now approaching its 2026 deadline, forced Arizona, California, Nevada, and 5 other states into difficult conversations about sharing a river that no longer produces what the original document promised. Las Vegas had changed everything it could change, drilled everything that could be drilled, conserved everything that could be conserved, and the lake was still not safe. The tunnel is built, the conservation is working, the lake has partially recovered, and none of it is enough. Climate projections for the American Southwest are not ambiguous. The region is getting hotter, drier, and more unpredictable, a combination that stresses every assumption water infrastructure was ever built on. The models that once predicted gradual change have been repeatedly revised toward faster timelines and more severe outcomes. What scientists described as a worst-case scenario 15 years ago is now increasingly discussed as a likely baseline. The third straw reaches water at 860 feet elevation. That number was chosen carefully, deep enough to access water even when Lake Mead drops below the dead pool threshold for Hoover Dam's power generation. But the Colorado River system has a harder limit. Full dead pool, the point at which no water can physically flow past Hoover Dam under any conditions, sits at approximately 895 feet. Below that level, the third straw itself becomes irrelevant. The intake still exists, the tunnel is still intact, but the water it was built to reach is simply no longer there. Paleoclimate research adds the most unsettling layer. Tree ring data and geological records show that the Colorado River Basin has experienced mega droughts lasting decades, conditions far more severe and far longer than anything in the modern instrumental record. The 20-year dry stretch that drained Lake Mead to 26% capacity may not have been an anomaly. It may have been a preview. Beneath the surface, a separate threat is quietly building. As Lake Mead's levels fluctuate dramatically, sediments on the lakebed are disturbed and remobilized. Those sediments carry heavy metals and toxic residues from decades of mining operations and industrial activity along the shoreline. Rising water floods old contamination sites that were considered contained when submerged and stable. The third straw secures access to water. It does not guarantee the quality of what comes through it. 40 million people across 7 states depend on the Colorado River. Las Vegas built the deepest, most expensive municipal water intake in American history and still cannot guarantee its own survival past the next prolonged drought. Federal proposals to bypass Glen Canyon Dam entirely, rerouting water flow to restore some semblance of natural river function, reflect how drastically the thinking has shifted. The infrastructure built for one era is being reconsidered for a completely different one. The Southern Nevada Water Authority plans for worst-case scenarios because the worst case keeps arriving ahead of schedule. The third straw cost $1.4 billion. It took 7 years to build. It solved the immediate problem of reaching water that 2 existing pipes could not touch. But it did not solve the desert. And the desert is still winning. Las Vegas is not a cautionary tale. Not yet. It is something more complicated than that. A city that looked at an impossible problem and refused to stop engineering its way forward. The third straw is real. The conservation numbers are real. The tunnel sits 3 miles under Lake Mead right now, pulling water from depths that no drought in recorded history has ever reached. That is not nothing. That is extraordinary. But Las Vegas is also not unique. It is simply the most visible city on the most visible fault line of a water crisis that stretches across the entire American West. Phoenix is watching the same lake. Los Angeles draws from the same river. Farmers across Arizona and California irrigate with the same allocation that the 1922 compact promised, and the Colorado River can no longer consistently deliver. The 2026 renegotiation of that compact will force decisions that no tunnel can make. How the 7 basin states divide a shrinking resource will determine whether cities grow, whether farms survive, and whether the engineering marvel sitting beneath Lake Mead ever gets truly tested at its limits. The third straw bought time. Time for conservation to scale. Time for policy to catch up with physics. Time for the snowpack to return and the lake to breathe again. Whether that time gets used wisely is not an engineering question. The tunnel is drilled, the water still flows. But somewhere beneath Lake Mead's surface, the clock is still running.